Hi there. Welcome to the Business of Success, the podcast where growth isn't just a buzzword and success is anything but accidental. I'm your host, Parul, award-winning CS leader and best-selling author, and I'm here to talk about what actually drives sustainable business: customer value, leadership, talent, community, and the systems behind companies that really, truly last. In each episode, I sit down with founders, operators, thinkers, and builders who are building success from the inside out. We go beyond the headlines and beyond the hype to unpack the real decisions, trade-offs, and frameworks that turn value into retention, growth, and impact. Because success isn't just about scaling faster, it's about building smarter. And if you're ready for honest conversations, practical insights, and a bit of a more human way to grow your business, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. So what if the fastest way to grow your company isn't to invest in more sales, isn't to invest in a better product, and isn't to invest in more marketing? What if instead it's to invest in other people's success? Most of the narratives that we hear today are really focused on scaling fast, optimizing margins, cutting costs, acquiring customers as cheaply as possible. But in every company where I've seen sustainable growth year over year, decade over decade, there's something that has stood out, and that was their investment in employees and customers. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of sharing with you a bit of my experience and why I feel that if you invest in others' success, you will see your company's success grow. I started my career in occupational ergonomics, a career focused on wellness and health, and something that I didn't realize at that time, employee experience. Occupational ergonomics is all about designing the workplace to better fit the human body, and that not only led to more productivity, but also employee retention. As I transitioned to HR, I started to recognize what that truly meant. I worked for a very large CPG company where HR was a major investment, and we saw how that investment kept people there year over year. I also worked at a very small, at that time, startup, which actually was in the process of IPOing. And I got to see the other side of HR. I got to see the side where employee experience was focused on cool perks and things for the office, but not necessarily the fundamentals that drove a truly nurturing environment. Not at that time anyways. Fast forward beyond my work in ergonomics and HR to my work in customer success, where I started to understand there was another lens of experience that I hadn't learned before, which was customer experience. Coupling customer experience and employee experience together has allowed me to see that true success for a company is not rooted solely in the number of sales that you achieve. It's rooted in employee experience, which leads to better productivity and retention. It's rooted in customer experience, which leads to better revenue retention and expansion. And it's rooted in investment in another's success. So let's talk more about this and break down what happens when we focus on and invest in these key areas. When employees thrive, they can better solve problems. They can better care for the customers that you invest in. They can innovate, and they can stay longer. In this day and age, I feel like we see a lot of companies churning employees, investing in somebody, maybe having a short-term stint and that person turning over. Where I grew up in the world of HR, there was a real focus on longevity, promoting from within and really encouraging people to find a home in the company. Why is that principle so important? It's not just about retention. It is, yes, about knowledge management. It is about growth and about finding ways to make your business truly expand with that knowledge. But there's another reason, and it's cost. Every time that you onboard a new employee, you're actually spending money on them. And so every time you churn an employee, you're actually spending money to not only hire a new one, but also to retain them. So employee retention and employees thriving actually makes good business sense. Let's talk a little bit about customers. When customers succeed, they tend to renew. They tend to expand. They tend to advocate. They bring with them referrals. Now, you might think, well, my main focus of my business is going to be to sell more business. But what good is the business that you've sold if you cannot ensure that that business is going to be there when you next look to that balance sheet? So in the world of software, where I have spent a lot of my time, renewal and retention is so important. We thrive on the fact that ARR, annual recurring revenue, can be measured. When a customer doesn't renew, you essentially have lost that and you're back to the acquisition cycle. Yet, you see so many startups spending a lot of money investing in hundreds and hundreds of salespeople and SDRs trying to really lean into that initial cycle. What they don't necessarily do is spend that same investment in the customer. If you have a really successful and healthy customer, they're going to provide you revenue well beyond that first sale. They're not going to only do it in the form of their own renewal, but they might expand, but they're going to tell their friends and they're going to bring you more business. This is the concept of the revenue bow tie, where your revenue can also expand beyond that point of sale, and that expansion can be exponential. So revenue becomes a byproduct, not the primary driver. So why do most companies get this backwards? When it comes to employee experience, most companies start to treat employees as costs. Obviously, when you're somebody that's looking at a balance sheet, there are quite a few overhead costs that come with employees. Things like benefits, things like the actual salary that you pay them. And it's not, small amounts of money. However, when you think about what that individual contribution brings to your company in the form of knowledge management, in the form of long-term growth, that cost should technically be outweighed by the benefits achieved. And when you look only at employees as costs, you're kind of prioritizing short-term metrics. You're not really prioritizing the long game. What can start to happen though is if you churn a bunch of employees, you're essentially causing yourself to have repeated employee costs, onboarding costs. That's a cost that isn't often measured and is one that companies could consider measuring to start to think about what their true cost of acquisition of employees and retention is. Let's talk a little bit about customers. What do companies do wrong? They start to treat customers as transactions. They, might segment them. They might give them, certain amounts of sort of support based on how much money they spend. When you start treating customers as transactions, you're literally looking at the money they bring in and not the full value potential that they bring in. When you underinvest in customer support, customer experience, customer success, you lean into cycles that are reactive rather than being proactive, and you prioritize essentially customer growth on the logo side, but not necessarily customer growth that comes out of renewal and expansion. We all know this. These stats are available almost anywhere, but retention is cheaper than acquisition. And expansion is what really drives SaaS growth. So no matter who you are, no matter what your company is, no matter if you're an AI unicorn, your ability to have a high NRR, which is your net revenue retention, on top of your base revenue is the gold standard. So you want to have a high NRR. You want to have something that's over 100%, that's maybe over 120%. When you have numbers that are showing expansion, you know that not only is your product something that people want to use, but that customers are leaning into and that they are growing. You start to see problems when companies start to churn. And when you treat customers like transactions and not spending time to invest in their success, that will start to show up as churn. Let's talk about some proof. Like, what does this look like in practice? We're going to talk about two different examples. One is an investment in employees and business gains. Consider the example of training programs. Training programs provide an opportunity for employees to upskill and up-level. Not every company spends a lot of money on training programs. Frankly, many startups don't at all. They might look at those costs and say, those are costs we would like to avoid right now. However, if you think about the cost that comes with employee retention and growth of that employee, that investment in training should technically help the employee grow faster and actually contribute better to your business. So not only are you going to increase the benefit that you're already receiving from that employee, you're also going to possibly keep them around longer. Training programs can be used as a form of recognition. They can help to define growth paths. And you can actually also more objectively measure how an employee is doing based on that training analysis and assessment. So training programs kind of provide a little bit of cost, but a higher amount of output and benefit than most people consider. I work with a lot of early stage startups, and I offer training programs to many, many companies that I work with. The companies I find that are usually investing in training are growth stage and higher. Companies that have already achieved success that are really looking to kind of now grow and maybe scale, and then they'll start to invest in training. But what's amiss is in those early days, investing in training so that you can actually level up your team very quickly and gain all the skill set that you need from the employee base that you have. Higher performance, lower turnover, stronger customer relationships, stronger growth. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Okay, let's talk about another example. We're going to talk about a customer investment that will drive revenue growth. This is going to be a value realization program. Now, you might say, what is this fancy word and why do I need it as a startup? It's nothing fancy. Value realization program is simply a program that says, hey, are we achieving value? And do we actually know that we're achieving it? If you ever have questions about this, I have a value framework that is free to download, and I recommend people check it out. Value is broken down into various categories: value clarity, value delivery, value execution, and expansion potential. And if you can quickly identify how you're doing in each of these categories and try to address which metrics you might have gaps in and areas that you could succeed, you can actually do much better at securing long-term renewal and partnership. Whose value am I talking about though? I am referring to customer value. So in this case, what we want to consider is an investment in understanding customer value, understanding where the gaps might be, and how you can actually drive proactive engagement with customers to achieve value. It's a small investment up front, but it can lead to huge revenue growth and revenue potential. All right, so what is the point here? My whole point here is that when you invest in others, you create sort of a flywheel effect, right? And I will call it the success flywheel, because this is the business of success. When you invest in your employees and you invest in your customers, well, I should say, let's start with the employees. You invest in your employees. Your employees will start to deliver more exceptional experiences. Your customers will start to achieve more real outcomes. Your customers will realize more value. They will stay, they will grow, and they will advocate. And your revenue will increase steadily. You will then reinvest that revenue or part of it into your employees and your customers, and you create this growth cycle or flywheel that stops being a sprint. It becomes something that is actually sustainable for your business. So how can you start today? Let's talk through different categories of people that might be listening. So if you are a founder and executive, ask some key questions about your employee group. Are our employees set up to succeed? And what do our retention numbers look like? What are the goals that we want to set? If you are a company that is churning employees every 1 to 2 years, you likely have higher acquisition and retention costs than you recognize. So start to measure those and see what is actually happening on that employee side. Also, take a look at your customer value metrics and outcomes and look not just at activity, but look and understand where you might have gaps in that value realization cycle and where you can actually provide more value to your customers. For managers, start to remove friction for your teams. This is where managers can help to enable success by allowing people to grow in different ways. One might be finding opportunities to level up, delegating work, creating clarity and goals, allowing them to have a little bit of autonomy to grow. Maybe it's an investment in coaching. Maybe it's something that you're providing for them. When it comes to customers, individual managers can start to track outcomes at the customer level. You can understand in your different customer segments what is happening and where your gaps might be. And if you have got a founder or an executive that has got this top-down approach, you can then fill in the goals that they're trying to achieve. Last but not least are individual contributors. You have the responsibility to focus on the outcomes for not only your customers, but for yourself. Build relationships based on value, right? Don't just build soft, cushy relationships based on good rapport, because that won't get you very far. Ensure that you are building relationships based on value. And if you feel you have gaps in the way that your experiences or things that you would like to see happening better, advocate for yourself. Talk about it with your manager. That manager should be tracking outcomes and goals per the leadership scorecard mentioned. And this top-down approach should have actionable insights for you. So why does this work in the end? This whole cycle of employee experience and customer experience really creates something that is so very important. And it is the concept of advocacy. When you build experiences that people want to be a part of, you build advocates. I will tell you, I have left companies that I loved working at. It sounds funny to say that, but I had great experiences. I had great relationships. I would still advocate for those companies now. I left for whatever, an opportunity or some other reason. I would still advocate for those companies today. And that really does matter. If you build winning employee experiences and winning customer experiences, you not only create a virtuous cycle of growth for yourself, but you also create advocacy, which is one of the most purest forms of growth and expansion that there is. So let's consider, if you want your company to grow, start by helping others. Don't just invest in more sales, more marketing, growing the product. Invest in the success of your employees and your customers. Flip the script a bit and consider how much your success will follow. So as you leave this session today, I would love to ask you to consider, what's one area that you might invest in today? Or what's one gap that you might try to close today? What's one step you might take towards building that success flywheel that's going to not only allow you to retain and grow, but allow you to expand through really happy employees and really successful customers? Thank you for joining me on the Business of Success today, and I hope that this will help you get one step closer to building better from the inside out.